Hi, this is Mrs. Steelman, and this is Lecture 2 of the Faerie Queene by Edmund Spenser. And this particular lecture is on SparkNotes, Summary, and Commentary. Hopefully you just finished the lecture on the Introduction to Spenser, and you've already been to the Spenser website where you've been able to look around a little bit, discover some things about Spenser on your own, and then hopefully bring some information to share with the class. This particular lecture is also going to be a short lecture, and it's about the pluses and minuses of using SparkNotes, especially the commentary part. Most of the time when you look up a particular literary piece, such as the Faerie Queene, you can look on a place like SparkNotes or Shmoop or even Nomia in order to find out a little bit about the play. It's a great place to start. Usually SparkNotes is broken up into two separate categories. You have the summary, which tells you about what's going on in the poem, as well as the commentary. And the commentary is really the analytical part and the part that you don't want to miss because it talks more about what the poem means, maybe the symbolism, the themes, and so on. So it's a really good place to find out information about anything difficult that you're about to read. You'll notice that the screen in front of you says Book 1, Cantos 1 and 2, but we're only going to be thinking about Canto 1. In fact, there are quite a few books in this story of the Faerie Queene, and there are actually quite a few cantos in each book. In Book 1, Canto 1, there are 55 stanzas, so even that in and of itself is quite a bit and something that we're going to be reading. So I hope you enjoy it. Let's take a look at the very first thing that SparkNotes tells us, and I'm going to actually get a marker here so that I can do some highlighting, and that's what I would like you to do as well in your notes. So you'll definitely want to download these SparkNotes summary and commentary that you will see on the AP Literature website and do some highlighting or underlining yourself. We're going to start off. It says Book 1 tells the story of the Night of Holiness, the Red Cross Knight. And so that's important to note. The Red Cross Knight is really the main character of the story. So that's important to know. He actually has this red cross on his shield, and which is exactly what it says in this first line. He has been given a task by Gloriana, the greatest glorious queen of fairyland, to fight a terrible dragon. So we know that that's his mission, and he's traveling with a beautiful, innocent young lady and a dwarf as a servant. So we have the dwarf, that's one character, and we have a beautiful, innocent young lady who is Una. We'll be learning about her in just a little bit. Just as we join the three travelers, a storm breaks upon them and they rush to find cover in a nearby forest. So that forest is actually pretty important because, as you can remember even from Dante, and you're going to see a lot of similarities here, sometimes he gets lost and can't find his way, and he's really trying to find that straight path. When the sky is clear, they find that they are lost and they end up near a cave, which the lady recognizes as the Den of Error. And that's pretty important. You probably remember the Woods of Error in Dante. Well, this is actually the Cave of Error or the Den of Error. And of course, this would be something very dangerous, a place that Red Cross Knight would not want to go into. Ignoring her warnings, Red Cross enters and is attacked by the terrible beast, Error. So this is a beast that's going to try to destroy him and her young. She wraps him up in her tail, but he eventually manages to strangle her and chops off her head. Error's young then drink her blood until they burst and die, which sounds pretty gruesome. Victorious, the knight and his companions set out again, looking for the right path. And so again, be thinking about looking for the right path as being pretty important. Because that's what Dante was doing, and that's exactly what Red Cross is doing. And you'll probably notice that Spenser did take a lot of information, maybe not so much from Dante, but from Virgil. But we know that Dante took from Virgil as well, so you'll notice some similarities. As night falls, they meet an old hermit who offers them lodging in his inn. As the travelers sleep, the hermit assumes his real identity. He is Archimago, the black sorcerer, and that's definitely a name that you will want to remember. And he conjures up two spirits to trouble Red Cross. One of the sprites, or spirits, obtains a false dream from Morpheus, the god of sleep. The other takes the shape of Una, the lady accompanying Red Cross. So that's her name and the spelling of it. These sprites go to the knight. One gives him the dream of love and lust. When Red Cross wakes up in a passion, the other sprite, appearing to be Una, is lying beside him, offering a kiss. The knight, however, resists her temptations and returns to sleep. So that's pretty important because the knight would be living in a code of honor. And back then, there were actually books that they read which told them the rules that they needed to follow in order to be a good knight. And this is something that Red Cross is going to be battling during his whole adventure, is this idea of good and evil. He expects himself to be perfect, a perfect knight, and he expects it of others as well. And so because he has this expectation, sometimes it's difficult for him because he thinks if he's fighting for Una, for example, he would expect her to be pure and chaste, the perfect princess that he would be fighting for. Archimago then tries a new deception. He puts the sprite disguised as Una in a bed and turns the other sprite into a young man who lies with the false Una. Archimago then wakes Red Cross and shows him the two lovers in bed, who are false, of course. Red Cross is furious that Una would spoil her virtue with another man, and so in the morning he leaves without her. It seems to be an interesting thing for him to do. Let me see if I can get my marker again. Because he actually would leave a damsel in distress behind and just go, which seems like an odd thing to do. So we'll be thinking about that when we read the poem. When the real Una wakes, she sees her knight is gone, and in sorrow rides off to look for him. Archimago, enjoying the fruits of his scheme, now disguises himself as Red Cross and follows after Una. Now this next section is actually the section from Canto 2. So we're not going to be reading that next paragraph, and we're going to move right on to the commentary. The commentary then is the part that's going to give you a little bit more information. I do want you to notice, though, actually, when we go back up to the summary, how much information is given about what's going on in this particular canto. If you look and see, there are two paragraphs there, really about 55 stanzas that are in the poem. We don't know anything about how the poem is written. We don't know anything about the images. We don't know really any of the details. So some of that you'll get from the commentary, but there's nothing like actually reading the language of Edmund Spenser to find out what's really going on. So let's turn to the commentary. Red Cross is the hero of Book 1, and I think that's pretty important to know that he is what we call an archetype. That's Archetype, if you want to add that into your notes. An archetype is a kind of character that you're going to find in a lot of different either poems or novels, plays, whatever. It's a certain type of person that you would find over and over again. So he is the kind of person who is heroic. He has a code of honor. He tries to be pure. He makes mistakes, of course, but he always comes out on top. So he's an archetype. And in the beginning of Canto 1, he is called the Knight of Holiness. He will go through great trials and fight fierce monsters throughout the book, and this in itself is entertaining as a story of the heroic knight errant. However, the more important purpose of Faerie Queene is its allegory, and you've definitely heard that word before. We know that Dante's Inferno is an allegory as well. The meaning behind its characters and events. The story setting is a fanciful fairyland. And so this is important to note too, that Edmund Spenser, does not expect that this is a real story set in a real place. Only emphasizes how its allegory is meant for a land very close to home, Spenser's England. The title character, the Faerie Queene herself, is meant to represent Queen Elizabeth, and that would be Gloriana. Red Cross represents the individual Christian on the search for holiness who is armed with faith in Christ, with the shield with the bloody cross. One thing I want to point out is there have been lots of books written about things like this. In the 1600s, so a full 100 years after this was written, John Bunyan wrote The Pilgrim's Progress. And it's written about a main character whose name is Christian, who actually is trying to find the straight path, just like we've been talking about in some of these other books. And he does this by climbing a mountain to try to find the truth. Apollyon is the Satan of that particular book. So there have been lots of books about travels and where we actually have Christian as the main character or a Christian as the main character. Let's go back to the commentary. He is traveling with Una, whose name means truth. So that's pretty important to know. For a Christian to be holy, he must have true faith, and so the plot of Book 1 mostly concerns the attempts of evildoers to separate Red Cross from Una. So we're going to mark that. Most of these villains are meant by Spencer to represent one thing in common: the Roman Catholic Church. The poet felt that in the English Reformation, the people had defeated the false religion, Catholicism, and embraced the true religion, which was Anglicanism. Thus, Red Cross must defeat villains who mimic the falsehood of the Roman Church. So that is one of the big things that you're going to be learning about in this poem. It's an anti-Catholic poem. Once we get to the poem, you'll see many instances where the poet is criticizing the Catholic Church, and he does this symbolically or in an allegorical form. The first of these is error. When Red Cross chokes the beast, Spencer writes, her vomit full of books and papers was. These papers represent the Roman Catholic propaganda that was put out in Spencer's time against Queen Elizabeth and Anglicanism. The Christian Red Cross may be able to defeat these obvious and disgusting errors, but before he is united to the truth, he is still lost and can be easily deceived. This deceit is arranged by Archimago, whose name means arch-image. So we'll mark that. The Protestants accused the Catholics of idolatry because of their extensive use of images. The sorcerer is able through deception and loss to separate Red Cross from Una, that is, to separate holiness from truth. Once separated, holiness is susceptible to the opposite of truth or falsehood. Red Cross may be able to defeat the strength of Sansvoy, literally without faith or faithlessness, through his own native virtue, but he falls prey to the wiles of falsehood herself, Duessa. And the rest of this section is basically, at least from this paragraph, is focusing on Canto 2, so we're not going to actually finish this paragraph. It says in the final paragraph, though, that the Faerie Queene also has many sources outside of the Bible. Spencer considers himself an epic poet, so he borrows from Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey and Virgil's Aeneid. So that's important to know. This is most evident at the opening of the book, in which Spencer calls on one of the muses to guide his poetry, and we know that's a sign of an epic poem anyway. The scene with the human tree, in which a broken branch drips blood, likewise recalls a similar episode in the Aeneid. And we know that that also happens in Dante's Inferno, because one of you presented that, and now you know that Dante got that from Virgil as well. So that's the end of this particular section. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in class tomorrow.